Good day and welcome to another episode of Drew's Book Reviews. Today, we're going to be talking about the one story that is common to all of humanity. From the very ancient days of our mythos, right up to the modern era in pop culture. This is the story that tells the story of humanity. If you're interested, stay tuned. This is coming right up. So today's book review is all about the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. So this whole book goes through the entire history of our mythology and our mythos throughout our cultural and history into these stories that we tell each other. Everything from Star Wars with the whole story of Luke and his, start out with this poor obscurity as his rise to this legendary figure within the Star Wars canon, to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and the journey that our characters take within that story of Frodo, humble beginnings, to become basically this hero of this whole entire saga, to even the Wheel of Time, where we have the legendary story of Rand al'Thor and his journey to becoming basically this superpowered being of the Dragon Reborn. So these ideas are throughout our entire mythos canon of the entire history of our culture, our religions, and our ideologies that come through with everything that we want to believe within the society and the cultures in which we live. So the mythos of the hero's journey, the humble beginnings to the refusal of the call, all the way through to the final acceptance of the call, facing the trials and tribulations and facing the darkness that may be contained within ourselves, or possibly our descent into the upper abysses of hell, burning, raging fire that we have there, and only to come out and be reborn on the other side. So, our religious mythology is part of this. I mean, Christ is an example of that. Within the religious mythos is the one that I'm most familiar with, being raised in a Christian theology. That is something that I'm most familiar with. So the humble beginnings for Christ, to the eventual call to his purpose, to his eventual sacrifice and death and descent and resurrection again. So that's kind of part of that whole mythos, that monomyth that is portrayed here. But in addition to that, there's also the cosmogonic cycle, which deals with the creation of the world to the destruction of the world. There was a terrible, ghastly silence, followed by a terrible, ghastly noise, followed by a terrible, ghastly silence. So this is all part of that greater epic story in the monomyth, in which Joseph Campbell goes over within this book, and kind of really takes this approach of analyzing it from the perspective of world religions, from Christianity to Buddhism to Hinduism to First Nations cultures and religions, even our Greek mythology as well as our Norse mythology, all mixed in, and they all kind of share these common ideas, these common phenomena that we see within the greater mythos of mankind, this monomyth. I can tell you, after reading this book, I was watching Star Wars last night, and I cannot look at Star Wars the same way again. I kind of always knew it had that, kind of monomyth trope to it, essentially, but I also know this is the book that inspired George Lucas to create Star Wars in the first place. And this has come out, and now I'm watching Star Wars. Well, it came out in 1949, but I was watching Star Wars last night, and I just found myself analyzing the story and plotline through the ideas contained within this book, and that's what made it really interesting for me as far as the reading of this book and how it applies to our modern pop culture. And that just became a really interesting aspect of this particular story for me. So that's kind of what this whole book is about. Now to get into a little bit of my thoughts, particularly on the subject matter contained within the book itself. So some of the things that this book talks about is it really kind of takes this Freudian approach to some of the aspects of our world mythology and the ideas that are contained within our stories. Specifically, it speaks a lot to the psychoanalyst dream analysis that Freudian was kind of famous for in a lot of ways, amongst other things. So it's really, really big on this psychoanalyst Freudian analysis type deal going on within the dreams that we have. Now, for me, this is not something that I particularly, I guess, follow or buy into, I guess is the best way to put it. Now, I'm certainly no expert in psychology. I've got very limited post-secondary psychology training. I did take 2 classes, specifically Introduction to Psychology and Abnormal Psychology and Crime, as kind of introductory courses to the world of psychology, but I'm certainly by no means an expert in psychology when it comes to anything at all. So I don't mean to say that this thing isn't legit as far as psychoanalyst dream analysis goes, but it's just not something that I can really see as a actual legit real scientific thing. I don't think that our dreams can be analyzed that way. Definitely I accept that we can that sometimes we dream about things that are perhaps important to our personal lives, but I think they're more reflections of things that are happening in our lives and supposed to be interpreted in some kind of fanciful, mystical, subconscious meaning type way. So it's just not something that I was able to really, I guess, be sold on in terms of how the book deals with the psychoanalytics and the dream analysis contained within it. So it's just not my thing, and that is absolutely fine. Of course, maybe some people find that, but for me, it just was not something that was working well for me with respect to this particular book in terms of that aspect of what the book is discussing. But for sure, something that I can absolutely say is I learned a lot from this book. I definitely gained knowledge I didn't have before, and that's one of the things that I absolutely love about reading these nonfiction books, is really kind of coming to a bigger and better understanding of what these books are all about and where they come from, where our stories come from, and it really kind of delves into this cultural need that we have to tell stories, discussing aspects of mythology from all kinds of religions across the world. Definitely there's an entire chapter called In the Belly of the Whale, which, I always knew the story of Jonah from the Bible being swallowed by the whale, but it never really thought of it in terms of the mythos and the monomyth before. When I came across that chapter in the belly of the whale, I started thinking, oh, wait a minute, that's Jonah's story. He was in the belly of the whale. And it just kind of talks about how there's these common themes throughout our stories, through all different religious and mythos and cultural realities of the world, I guess, that we live in the different cultures. They all have some aspect at some point of this idea that, our hero is swallowed by some kind of entity and brought about the whole being eaten by an animal of some kind. In Jonah's case, it definitely was the whale. There's often some kind of, sea creatures have been involved, but also a lot of land creatures have been involved. But generally, this concept and idea is certainly more widespread than I originally knew, which makes that really, really kind of interesting to kind of see that in that new perspective. I've also been reading The Wheel of Time lately, and I'm just seeing a lot of parallels and influence in The Wheel of Time from maybe not this book necessarily. I don't know if Robert Jordan ever actually read The Hero with a Thousand Faces, but I'm definitely seeing influence of these ideas within The Wheel of Time. So one of those ideas itself is, I came across a story about the Horn of Barabu, which when blown, others will come wherever they may be assembled to join with the one who blew the horn, and they become linked to that person who blew the horn. So this kind of really, I was reading this and said that, wait a minute, that's the same basic idea behind the Horn of Valere. And that was just kind of a really interesting thing that I came across in this book, because obviously this was written well before the Wheel of Time, and so I could only imagine that it definitely had influence in Robert Jordan's epic Wheel of Time, but that's not the only aspect of it that seemed to have influenced that particular story. The ancient religion of Jainism, it seems, also has this idea of time as a wheel. It's ever revolving and turning, and it's a wheel with 12 spokes, each spoke representing a different age. And again, as we know, just because I'm reading the Wheel of Time right now, so it's forefront in my mind, it's this idea in the Wheel of Time that time is a revolving wheel, and the world and the universe as we know it continues to cycle through these different ages in a repetitive fashion, just as the Wheel of Time turns and ages come and go. What was, what is, what will be under the shadow. But this is not a Wheel of Time book review. This is a Hero with 1,000 Faces book review by Joseph Campbell. But when all said and done, like, it's just really interesting to see how these myths and these legends, the cosmogonic cycle being the destruction and creation of the world, play into it. It's interesting. What I didn't know before was how in many of these myths about the cosmogonic cycle is this idea of the earth being destroyed by the different elements: wind, fire, water, rain. And of course we have numerous theologies and numerous legends throughout the globe about this worldwide flood that happened. We know in the Christian mythos it is Noah and his ark story. There's the Babylonian flood legends, but that's not all. There's flood legends throughout many different cultures. So we've already seen historically about this idea that the world was destroyed by water, one of the 4 elements. But we also know that when we look again, going back to the Christian mythos, because this is something I'm familiar with, is this idea of the world will be burned and destroyed by fire. But it seems that it's not just Christianity that has this idea, that much of the rest of many of the other mythos and legends and religions and spirituality throughout the rest of the world also have this same idea that the earth will be destroyed by fire. So it's really just fascinating reading through the Hero with 1,000 Faces, getting this more open ideologies, a better understanding of how the one myth, the one legend of humanity has really permeated our culture, our societies, and our pop culture. And overall, it's just a really enjoyable read. There are things, like I said, with the whole dream analysis thing, and there are parts of it that just didn't jive with me, or didn't find I was all that interested in, that ran kind of dry for me throughout the book, which is why I'm not giving it like a 5 out of 5 stars or anything. I did rate this 3.5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, so overall still a good read, albeit didn't always have that interest for me as well as I maybe would have liked. But again, that's okay. You know, it's fine. It's still a really good read. I mean, it inspired Star Wars, and overall I just really enjoyed this book. And if you are interested in this idea of the monomyth, its cultural impact, ramifications, and how the monomyth has been influencing our cultural stories for thousands of years, this is definitely an interesting read, and I would recommend it. Like I said, overall 3 out of 5 stars, really enjoyed it. And those are just my thoughts on Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. So, you know, if you like this, or you want to see what else I'm up to in reading, definitely don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you next time on the next episode of Drew's Book Reviews. Until then, keep on reading. Bye!